of realize that they're being loud, and then they get soft, right? And then they kind of build up again, and then, oh, well, shoot, and then, what's the big thing that happens? Exactly, right? And what I want you to imagine in this, right, is that happens during the first part of the third movement. It starts out raucous, that's the people in the corner, and then they realize that things are kind of weird, and they probably shouldn't be so loud, and then maybe they're getting looks, right? Ooh, sorry, it's okay. And then they're talking about, and then they kind of get louder, oh. And then all of a sudden you get this, right? And it's over here. It's always the violins, right? And I'll show you where it is. And then what happens whenever you hear the big shush? It is stone quiet, right? Like even at the regular like the computers stop working at that moment, right? And it's just really quiet. And Haydn does that. He like stops the world for 2 whole measures to kind of clear the air after the shh. And then they all come back in and go, right? So, see if you hear what I hear. And if you don't tell me, all right?
And we're back.
And we're back.
And that was Micheal Gesme in action.
Dun, dun, dun.
You're always fun at the concerts. I mean, you're lively and entertaining, and you really have a good rapport with the audience, I think.
He teaches.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I have learned, yes.
One of my favorite things that somebody ever told me was actually somebody I had first met as a student. I had them at the college, and one of my music history classes responsibilities is to attend at least 2 performances during the course of the term, and write a little concert report. And these aren't music majors. These are music appreciator kind of students. And so they all go and come back after one of the symphony concerts, which is one of the ones I really want them to come to, so that they can see an orchestra in action. And so I always have a little Q&A after the concert week and say, how many of you went? What did you like? And one of the students says, man, you just stood right up there and held class. And I was like, yes. I was like, that's exactly right. I mean, there is maybe 50 years ago or so a divide that starts to happen to me where people who went to symphony concerts in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, most of them knew the music they were going to hear already, or at least part of it. And they actually chose what concert they were going to because there was a Brahms symphony or a piano concerto or a violin soloist or whatever it was. And the farther we get past that breaking point, the less and less the bulk of the audience actually knows what they're going to hear. And they don't know that that's really funny or that that's really serious or how the pieces are put together. And so my goal every concert, it doesn't matter where I'm at. I mean, if I'm in Salem doing a concert, if I'm in Bend or if I'm here, it doesn't matter if they're professional, if they're children. I mean, and I do this with a lot of children's honor orchestra kinds of things where I'll stop and I'll say, now, I want you to listen for this, and all they need is a hook. At least that's been my experience. They need, if they know one thing to listen for, they're in. I mean, they're committed to the piece, and then they'll hopefully hear something else that they like too. And I mean, I'll often tell them to tap their neighbor when they hear whatever goes by to give them the old elbow. And I don't really mind if there's even a little chuckling that goes on, unless it's a super serious piece, and then I won't make them laugh. But it's okay. I mean, in the old days, people would get up and leave in the middle and go eat and come back to the concert again. And you know, I mean, I don't necessarily encourage that, but I like that slight informality that people just are excited. I mean, more of a sporting event atmosphere than a sit on your hands and.
And do you feel like maybe the smaller, the chamber orchestra and the intimacy of the venue maybe lends itself more easily to that sort of an atmosphere?
It can.
Yeah.
Although I've done it with 1,400 seat halls too. I mean, I just, to me, you can create intimacy in a big space too, by just, you know, as long as they all think they know you, in a, like, I'm talking to you, you know, then it's a good thing.
Do you want to talk a little bit, one of you or both of you, about the difference between a regular symphony orchestra and a chamber orchestra?
Do you want to start?
I'll start. You jump in.
Go for it.
Well, we think about the Oregon Symphony, for instance, which means 80, maybe 80-plus players. And then we think about chamber music, which is usually somewhere from 2 to 10 players, yeah? But this is a chamber orchestra, which means it's an orchestra of all the instruments, well, not all, but a lot of the instruments that you find in an 80-piece orchestra, but smaller numbers. And repertoire that, you talk about the repertoire. It's obviously Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, but there's also a lot of other repertoire too.
Yeah, I mean, and building on that, chamber music. One of the definitions of chamber music, I mean, the name for which, you know, a misnomer is that it's intended to be performed in a small room, in a chamber, right? So if you have a dinner party, you know, 1800s or so, and you wanted music, you would hire a small group. To come and sit in the corner, right? Today you put your iPod on and you pump the music in. But I mean, in the old days, if you wanted music performed, you either made it yourself or you paid somebody else to do it. And you're not going to pay an orchestra, you're going to pay a small group. So there was this blossoming of music for small ensembles that was going on. And so those become chamber music. And the key element of chamber music is that it's one person on a part.
Okay. Oh, okay.
You know, one violin, you know, one oboe, and one piano. That's chamber music in its strictest sense. If you think about the Oregon Symphony, there are probably 18 first violins and 18 second violins and 8 cellos or 10 cellos and then, you know, 6 or 7 basses, all of that. And they're all playing the same thing. All 18 of those people have to play exactly the same. And so, I mean, that's where that big orchestra lush sound comes from. So, like she said, the chamber orchestra takes that proportion, meaning more than one person on a part, but it cuts it down. And what we're trying to emulate is the orchestra of about 1800. Because that was the standard. And across the 18 to the 1900s, the orchestra steadily grew. The composers like, I want more sound, I want bigger sound. Yeah, and the big catchphrase for the Romantic era is more is more. I mean, and by the time you get to, absolutely, you get to the end of that with people like Mahler, who are now bleeding into the 20th century, they wanted orchestras of 120 people. And then on exception, they wanted orchestras of 200 folks, you know, 4 harp players and 16 horn players, which is about 15 too many, you know, on most.
Especially for the conductor to try to manage.
Well, and that becomes an issue, you know.
You don't manage horns, you just don't look at them.
You just don't look at them.
You don't look at them, ever.
Anyway, it's beautiful. So what we are then is this chamber orchestra, depending on the nature of the concert, we'll have either just a string complement of about 25 people, and then the pieces that we play, other than the string section, will dictate how many winds we need. So that's, you know, the flutes and the oboes and the clarinets and bassoons. And usually, at most, we'll add pairs, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, and sometimes only 1 of each. But it's very much dictated by what the composer's intent was. And so, as Gwen mentioned, you know, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, they wrote for this orchestra. This is what they would envision as the size of the orchestra, the performing halls, this is the stage size, that kind of a thing. And then we will occasionally do pieces that are romantic, that are small, because they wrote for smaller things as well. And then you get into the 20th century, and there's a lot of chamber music chamber orchestra music that is written again, because if you think about what happened in World War I and World War II, the amount of musicians that were available to perform goes way down because they were off doing their thing.
And who was left?
And
women.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other half-hour show.
We won't go there. I was going to ask you then, in terms of how you choose your repertoire.
Sure.
I mean, your offerings for a year.
Sure.
I know last year you did the new piece, the world premiere
Right,
of the
with
piece.
Libby Larsen, yep.
And what about this year? How do you go about that?
So for this particular orchestra, you're restricted on some levels because of the orchestra itself. And we are also very limited in terms of the size of the stage.
It's
I mean,
small.
right now, when we have the full chamber orchestra, which sounds like an oxymoron, we barely fit, right? And it, there's room, but I mean, it's tight.
It's crunched up.
It's
yeah.
tight. And so, we're not going to do a big Tchaikovsky symphony.
Or as Walt would like to see you do, a Rachmaninoff or something.
Right, and that would be fun, but it probably wouldn't work because of the amount of extra musicians we would need to have, to fill out the
And
whole
where would
thing.
you put them?
I've thought about hanging them,
Bleachers.
but we've done a Tchaikovsky symphony before, we've done Dvorak symphonies before, but they are done in a way. I mean, my rationale for that is that most Dvorak symphonies were premiered with an orchestra that wasn't a whole lot bigger than ours. But if I was to really do them like the justice that I think they envision in their head, I would need a string section that was probably twice the size of what we do. But our strings are so strong that they can put out the sound, which is great. So I've been pretty comfortable with that. In terms of what else we perform besides just size, I ask the musicians every spring if they have any suggestions for repertoire. I would love to know what it is, and I keep an active list. And so, is it Walt who said?
Yes.
I got to talk with this gentleman. But I take every suggestion seriously, unless I know it's something we can't do, like it's way too big, or it would require 500 musicians and a choir of 1,000, which it just isn't going to happen. But beyond that, they're not really limited by technical stuff. We're doing some really difficult music on this upcoming concert.
This is Friday's concert,
Yeah.
which is just the strings.
Yep,
actually.
just the strings of the orchestra. And
Interesting.
And by the time this show airs, that will be a thing of the past because
Yeah.
that's the December 2nd concert.
Right.
But why don't we talk about what you're doing in May? We don't have a whole lot of time,
Sure.
but maybe you could talk about that.
So in May, we're doing the Mozart Requiem on one half of the concert and the Reformation Symphony of Mendelssohn on the other. So we've got kind of the Catholic end and we've got the Protestant end represented here, and the full orchestra is back in terms of how many participants there are. So we have all of the woodwind complement that's joining us for the symphony, along with some trumpets and trombones and things like that who participate in the Requiem and in the symphony. And then the Linfield choir is participating as well in the Requiem, obviously because it's a choral work, and so I'm really excited about that.
I would say. Now, in terms of rehearsing something like that, how many rehearsals do you have on site with your 5?
5.
That's 5 drives back and forth to Bend.
Or I couple them sometimes.
Okay.
Yep.
So we've only got about a minute left, and so do you want to go ahead and maybe give the date of that concert? Do you know it?
That is May 4th
Okay.
at 8 o'clock, and it's at the First Baptist Church in McMinnville.
Which is
So
a
when we
different
do
venue.
something with a choir, we try to move into a space where we can have orchestra and choir.
Okay. And people can get tickets if they so desire by going to?
Yes, well, the number is 883-2637. That's the orchestra office,
Okay.
and you just leave a message, and then
Perfect.
you'll get a call back.
Well, I really appreciate both of you being here today, and I'm hoping that maybe on one of your next trips into town we can do another interview because I didn't get to half of my questions. So anyway, thanks very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.